Dina Malik is a licensed clinical social worker. She holds a master's degree in social work from California State University, Stanislaus. Dina started in private practice in 2004, and her practice in Turlock, California is thriving. She was Assistant Director of Integrated Behavior Health at a federally qualified health center, mental health clinician with Children's System of Care, social worker with Child Protective Services. Dina claims her experience was from bottom up. Her position with Children's System of Care in the Child Welfare Unit was to provide counseling for youth and children in foster care with trauma at the Care Unit, where she collaborated with law enforcement at the center where they conducted forensic interviews for children that were sexually abused. Dina takes pride in her heritage and culture, where she contributed her professional expertise as an advisor in creating the Assyrian Wellness Collaborative in partnership with Stanislaus County Behavioral Health, Recovery Services, Prevention, and Early Intervention. She also served as the chair of the collaborative, organizing health fairs, raising awareness on the importance of cultural competency and sensitivity of the Assyrian community. Dina is passionate about helping people, especially refugees and immigrants. She feels connected to the challenges and obstacles of acculturation of those who have experienced trauma from back home or during their journey to the United States by normalizing talking about well-being and self-care. Welcome to the Modern Assyrian on A&B. My name is Carmen Morad. Hope and feel better. That is the theme of today's special program. My guest is Dina Malik, licensed clinical social worker from Turlock, California. Welcome, Dina.
Hi, well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Dina, you are a professional, a mental health professional, a therapist with a thriving practice in Turlock, with the Assyrian community having a large presence there. Thank you so much for joining me. I know you're very busy with your practice. For you to take time to join me in this conversation during these very unusual pandemic times. So, thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So, you and I have worked on a very special project called the Assyrian Wellness Collaborative, a partnership with Stanislaus County, a government agency, Behavior Health, Recovery Services, and Prevention and Early Intervention. Tell us a little bit about the importance of this conversation, Dina. May being Mental Health Awareness Month. We don't need a specific month to talk about our well being and our wellness, but please share with us, with your expertise, why is it so important to take care of ourselves? Knowing our culture, knowing the stigma, please share with our viewers the importance of self care.
Well, I want everybody to know that our mental health is connected to our physical health. And self care is about, I always tell everybody, being selfish and self centered in a very healthy way. That means you're giving your mind, body, and soul a priority in your life because when you're well balanced, you make better decisions, you have healthier relationships, your overall quality of life and well-being is just significantly increases and improves. So self-care is something I think in our culture too that we don't talk about, we don't address, and it's something I think is more in the American culture really talk about it a lot. And it's just all we know. I think in our culture is we work, we help, we give, but we don't just take a few minutes just for ourselves to do a self check-in and see how am I doing today. Is am I doing okay? Kind of fill up your own gas tank, I call it. Just do a self check. It's very important for your well being and emotional health.
Absolutely. When the Assyrian Wellness Collaborative was being formed, we really looked for professionals such as yourself, familiar with the culture,
Hmm.
because study shows that how we are raised, how we are used to doing things, determines
Hmm.
how we reach out for help if we need it, how we can recognize and decipher through what is being changed in a person's behavior, whether it's depression or anxiety or more serious, uncommon conditions that we might not be able to understand ourselves. And what does it
Mhm.
take when we do understand something is not right, whether ourselves or someone we love? And how do we start the conversation on that, Dina? This is a very sensitive subject matter.
It is, and I think this is where stigma reduction comes in. Oftentimes people, I always tell everybody, if you're having problems with your vision, you're having problems with your teeth, your physical health, there's no shame, there's no embarrassment surrounding going to the medical professional that can take care of you. But when it comes to mental health, it's kind of like a scarlet letter. Everybody thinks it's like degrading, or it's a mark on your character, or there's something to be ashamed of and embarrassed about. So what's really, really important is that we as a community, we as a family also, we have to provide a safe and nurturing environment for one another to be able to come up to each other and talk to each other, and not be embarrassed to say, hey, I've noticed, you're keeping in your room more, you're isolating, you're withdrawing, you used to love to do this and now you're not doing it anymore. And not to be afraid. That's very important, to reach out to your loved one, but also the individual that's suffering with it. Because oftentimes it's shame and fear of rejection and disappointing somebody that keeps them, from getting help. But it is very important to reach out to one another and to educate one another. Your brain is an
And,
organ
and
just
not
like the rest of your body.
and not being afraid of having the conversation, because there's
Mm-hmm.
so much stigma with labeling, especially in our community, but I'm sure at large, Dina, when it comes to um, if we let someone know that we're not feeling well, we are ashamed
Mm-hmm.
of weakness, of being labeled.
Yeah.
And that's something that we had been working on with stigma reduction, that
Mm-hmm.
a change in behavior can have symptoms, it can have triggers, and
Mm-hmm.
especially when we worked with people who have experienced trauma. Tell us a little bit about what trauma does, and especially for those members of our community, Dina, who have been refugees, asylum seekers. They have
Mm-hmm.
seen things, they have experienced some things that they might be able to put behind them. But PTSD is something very common, and
Mm-hmm.
I know that's one of your specialties. Please talk to us about what is PTSD and how common it is, and how does someone know that they are having symptoms and triggers of PTSD?
PTSD is post traumatic stress disorder. It's a type of anxiety disorder. And PTSD is a disorder that somebody will have if they experience a traumatic experience physically or emotionally. So, physical could be sexual assault, rape, physical abuse, victim of a violent crime, also witnessing community violence, wars. All the first responders see a lot of trauma with the bodies that they see. A lot of the Assyrians that have witnessed the wars and the atrocities in the Middle East, they have seen things that unimaginable. And when I hear about it in my office, I'm like, these are the things that I see and hear in the movies. I just didn't understand the magnitude of what they went through. And so, what that does is when you've had this intense fear, the symptoms become you're hypervigilant. You're always waiting for something to happen. You're always on alert. You just have a hard time trusting people. You're always aroused. It's called hyperarousal. And you have triggers. Triggers are things that remind you of that event. And then you start to have flashback. It's like a movie reel. You start to see it all over again. Anger is also part of PTSD, nightmares, and not for just children, but adults as well. With their nightmares, when they're so severe, they will have actual bedwetting as well. And avoidance, you avoid people, places, things that remind you of that traumatic event. And so, what happens with PTSD, if you're able to get services, it could go into full remission. You'll never forget what happened to you. It's just a part of, I call it people's journey in life. We all have, nobody goes through life unscathed. People often think that they're alone in it. And so, with the right help, with even medication, there's medication out there that helps stop the nightmares, but definitely therapy, cognitive behavior therapy really helps, which we do in individual counseling, and support from your family. That's huge as well. So when you have these symptoms, people oftentimes they don't know how to cope with it. So it can lead to drugs, any kind of addiction, but they're engaged in self-destructive behaviors because they want to avoid the feelings, the memories, what they're seeing again. So, with PTSD, those are the symptoms. Seeking out individual counseling is very important because you could absolutely work through it. Because I've had so many Assyrians that have come to me and their progress has been amazing. And I remember one in particular, when I met with them, I thought this is going to be a few years. And it wasn't. It was actually for the amount of trauma that it had, but they did so well in therapy. Within 6 months, they went from isolating, withdrawing, like major depression, all the PTSD, rocking themselves to smiling and laughing and going with neighbors and friends and just really understanding what the illness meant and how she had actually control over it versus it over her. And it was very powerful. So treatment
So,
works.
so therapy and treatment works, and the trick is number one, coming out of denial. If the and
Yeah.
you don't have to have been through war. You could
Yeah.
have childhood experiences, divorce,
Mm-hmm.
trauma, anything that causes that trauma where
Mm-hmm.
you might be able to say I can do this, it's behind me. But that's what PTSD is having flashbacks and having an
Yeah.
impact on your everyday life. And you mentioned anger. Anger is
Mm-hmm.
one of the symptoms of PTSD because when we see behavior of
Mm-hmm.
someone who's very angry, of someone who's getting attention, not only is this important to realize and for us to be educated on for ourselves and our loved ones,
Mm-hmm.
but also when you come in contact, let's say at work, let's say as a neighbor or a relative, someone who is having these symptoms, of how it's
Mm-hmm.
important to recognize that, either remove yourself from that situation
Yeah.
or somehow find a way to decipher through all the obstacles to perhaps find them help.
Yes. And I think once too, it's with Assyrians too, we come from a country where we don't have each mind matters. And whatever the disorder might be, it's always, will everybody find out? There's a lot of shame and embarrassment, just like, Americans in this country as well. But they come from a country where they can't trust the government. So when you as a therapist start out with saying you're a mandated reporter and you have to report certain things, immediately the fear kicks in, the government's going to know. Can I get my driver's license? Can I still become a citizen? Can I still get a job? So those are the things that are also or stigma, they're attached to mental health and seeking treatment as well. So those are myths. We have to do the myth buster on them, so to speak. You have to explain to them that it's confidential. HIPAA, as their privacy laws, no one can just walk in and ask about them. It's confidential who you see. It's confidential if they come here. They're protected by law. So it's a
And
safe
also,
place to where they
Dina,
could just be vulnerable.
yeah, and you mentioned this. This is a very important point, and I want all our viewers to
Mm-hmm.
recognize HIPAA. It has to do with privacy laws, just like attorney-client privileges. Mental health professionals, just like any public health or health professionals, there is a confidentiality that occurs. However, when it has to do with a mandated reporter, please explain what the difference is,
Mm-hmm.
because I remember families mentioning to me when they had issues with children, saying that we
Mm-hmm.
are afraid if we seek treatment for our children or our child, that child will
Mm-hmm.
be taken away from their custody. This is a real
Yeah.
fear, but it's
Yeah.
also an obstacle that keeps that child from getting the much needed and necessary treatment. Please explain to us how that process works.
Yeah, so I always try to tell everybody, so mandated reporting laws are there built for safety. Safety for the individual, but safety of the family as well. So one of them is, we're mandated reporters for child abuse. So if when anybody reports, physical, sexual abuse, medical neglect, neglect and
Mhm.
emotional abuse, by law, we're mandated to report that. But even Child Protective Services is an organization that wants to help. I used to work there. I was a social worker. So our number one goal was to keep families together. And I always explain to people, just because we make a phone call, that does not mean they take your kids away. Kids are removed when there's a immediate, safety issue. So somebody is physically abusive, breaking arms and legs, and mom isn't protecting them and allowing it to happen. Of course, you want somebody to come in and step in for that child. But other times, it's oftentimes they give them services and they give them resources and they tell them what else they can use in the community. So it becomes an agent of help. And so only when there's severe safety issues for the child is when they intervene. That means the mom and dad are the ones that are abusing the child and they're not going to stop. And then the other one is we're mandated to report if somebody is suicidal or homicidal. That means they want to kill themselves right now or they want to kill somebody else right now. So when people have to understand that when you have severe depression or if you're delusional, you can have the suicidal, the homicidal thoughts, and that's just for your safety. We help you to get into an evaluation at the psych hospital so they can see if you meet criteria to be hospitalized, or they give you other types of services. So that's what that's about, because there's oftentimes people, I call it, they have a break from reality. They just disconnect from reality and they become very lethal. I've had clients that were homicidal that would come back and say, thank you. Thank you so much. Because when they're homicidal and they've identified somebody, you have to do what's called a terrace off. So I had to actually warn the person myself. It's a law. And they came back and they thanked me because they had no idea how ill they were. Because nobody wants to do that when they're logical and rational. So all these mandated reporting laws are just for safety and safety alone. And the other one is, elder abuse. So if somebody's physically abusing or monetarily taking from an elder, we need to report those things. In this country, we have a lot of support for being taken advantage of and being victimized. And that's what these organizations are. They're there to actually help us, not to hurt us. But I think for our community, we come from a government and a country that always wants to hurt us. They don't care about how we think and how we feel and what our families need. So they kind of transfer that over to the United States. But once you explain it to them, they understand, they feel better, but it's just education, stigma reduction. And the other thing that we have to report also is anybody that's delayed, development to delayed adult. So let's say you have an adult with autism or an adult that's has an intellectual disability and they're being abused physically or taken advantage of with their money. Once again, it's about safety and protection of the most vulnerable. That's all these laws are about. They are not to hurt anybody, but to protect.
Dina, you brought up something very important that has to do with we bring certain cultural traditions to this country. And we've discussed that many times. And the terminology is cultural competency and sensitivity. And I know you have done so much work on that because not only is the competency something that we want the county officials and
Mm-hmm.
everyone has any contact with our community, the Assyrian community, to be aware of and to understand. But there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of things in our community that we need to improve. You said
Mm-hmm.
education. It's all about education and not fear. Because
Mm-hmm.
fear is something when you don't know about something, you're fearful of it. But
Yeah.
when we talk about cultural competency, what is your perspective within your professional opinion about mental health and how much more work we need to do in the Assyrian community to normalize the conversation?
I think it's, having I call them like in services, like we did with the Assyrian Wellness Collaborative. We would have these meetings where we invite the community and we educate them and we answer their questions. And if you remember, there was always a line after I would have a presentation because they wanted to know, they want the help. So I think that educating the community, helping them to understand what mental health is. One thing I always remember in our culture is aibele. If I can just blow that word out of the water, I would, out of our dictionary. Because having a mental health issue, it's not aiba, it's not shame. And one thing with our culture is, and I think it's because we came from a country where we weren't embraced by the majority. So we had to kind of, be just on our own. So people are very protective of, what's going on in their homes or their families' homes, and not in a good way, in a more of a like, oh God, it's shameful if they know we have somebody that's ill or has a need or is an addict, versus we need help, and and talking to other people that can tell you what your resources are so you're not in it alone. So education is key, normalizing it is key. I think having professionals in this field so that they know your language as well and your culture really helps too, because I feel like that's an experience. They want to come to me because just so that they know that I'm Assyrian. So I personally try to encourage a lot of Assyrians to go into the field. We need more males, of course, more Assyrian males to be in the field as well. So I think stigma reduction is that, is talk about it, educate them. Our culture, I always tell Assyrians, I'm going to make you an Assyrian American. What that means is bring in the positivity of the American culture, which is we talk about these things and we don't want to be ashamed and we don't have to be in it alone. And we could absolutely get help. And this is a blessing that we live in a country that cares about our mind. So that's what I like to do, educate and
Well, that
educate and give hope. Give hope to the hopeless.
That's right. That is so wonderful because we talk about hope and we talk about faith as we see in the background of where you are sitting. Let's talk about our culture and faith and the role that that
Hmm.
plays in our well being. We, being a Christian community, having Christian
Hmm.
values, what role does faith and our clergy play? Because when we talk about cultural competency, we understand our own culture and we know that it is our clergy, our reverend and priests that
Hmm.
we look up to when we have adversity, when there is trauma, when there is a loss in the family, or when there is something that goes on. Who are the first people that we talk to? Our clergy, our
Yes, it is.
first so-called pseudo therapists, right?
Hmm.
So, how
Yes.
important is it for us to reach out to our clergy to make sure that they have access to the
Hmm.
resources that our county offers? We do have reverends here that are educated in this field, but faith is important, prayer is important, a good family support system of friends and family is
Hmm.
important. But what happens, Dina, when the issue at hand requires more than that? How do we make sure, other than the Assyrian Wellness Collaborative having brochures of
Hmm.
all the resources on there? And the other point that you made, which is excellent, is having therapists and professionals that are familiar with
Hmm.
the culture and perhaps speak the language. How do we
Yes.
um, how do we do more about that? There's always more to do.
I think it's encourage your youth. When you're around your youth, your nieces, your cousins, your friends. That's what I did personally too. My own daughter's going to be one. My cousin's daughter, he's a male, and they're both in the program to be MSWs, and they both want to do therapy with the Syrian community. So I think it's educating our youth about it and calling us. Like anybody can call me. I've had several Assyrians call me that were college bound, and I'm not tooting my own horn. I'm just saying experiences that I've had that have actually helped them write their letters to get accepted into colleges, and one went the MFT route and marriage family therapist. So I think it's we need to spread the word because it's a beautiful profession to be in. It's such a gift and a privilege to everybody you work with, and to know that you give back to your community. It makes me almost emotional because they want it. They're starved for it. I have elderly folks coming, and my favorite was one of my clients, and he was like, everybody should have a therapist and they should come every week. And he was this elderly man, and he just changed. It's because, especially our men, they're the workers. They just go, they work, they provide, and that's it. Nobody does a check in with them. And how are you doing?
Mm.
And one thing I've noticed, especially with my male therapist clients that are elderly, like 65 and above, they just need to vent. They need to let it out, and they feel such relief as well. So I think, um, educating our future generation about this field, and encouraging the men because we need males, encouraging the females because we need females. There are certain things that you feel comfortable talking to a female about, and there's certain things you feel better talking to a male about. And there's other things that it doesn't matter, but I think it's putting it out there. So I'd like to encourage anybody that's considering a profession, I'll give Carmen my number. She has it. Call me. I don't care where from you're at, all over this world. I will tell you about this field because it's endless what you could do. The possibilities are endless. It's a
It
great
is
field.
rewarding because you're helping
Hmm.
people. And,
Hmm.
Dina, I would like to talk to you now about stress, the most common thing that people talk about that affects their personal health, their mental
Yes.
health, their especially now with this public health crisis that we have, the pandemic.
Hmm.
It has really changed our daily routine. It has changed economically with kids being school. I mean, there are some families that both husband and wife, mom and dad, are both home. There is uncertainty about financial situations, about uh, just a change in everyday environment. That causes stress. It's undue stress on top of the daily stress. What can you tell people when it comes to what's going on right now? How do we talk to one another? How do we calm each other down? And what do we tell our children who are really seeing something going on that they don't really understand?
I think for the adults, and even if the teens are doing it too, watch your social media and just watching news on it over and over and over, because that will create stress. That's going to intensify, I should say. Stress is already there, but it's going to magnify, intensify the stress because you're reading about what's going on all over the world. So it's going to add to that sense of helplessness and possible hopelessness as well. So I would say, watch the media intake once a day, maybe if you just want to know what's going on with progress made in treatment for coronavirus, and maybe, the stages now that we're being reintegrated back into our communities. And I think for the parents too, um, because domestic violence is also going up right now too, because they're stressed. Some of them, are worried about their jobs or losing their jobs, or if they've already lost their jobs, how are we going to make it, next month or this month with the finances. So I think for
Mhm.
the couples, just acknowledge that, you're both in it together. You know what I mean? Is remember your vows. Let's go traditional. Remember your vows in sickness and health, and good times and bad. And this is part of that moment. And if you overstress, you can't change anything. So I always tell people, focus on the tangibles. And the tangibles are the things that you could actually do something about. So talk about maybe budgeting, talk about, we need some fun time too. So board games are fabulous for the family. Um, watching movies, just have it unplug and disconnect and just enjoy each other for the moment. Don't live in the virus state of the stress. And with kids, it really depends on the ages and stages. So it matters where they're at developmentally. So if the kids are older, 12 and above, and I would ask them, don't just assume that they're, what they're thinking and feeling. So ask them, so how are you doing? What do you think about what's going on? Do you worry about anything? How are you doing with, not being in school, and your homework, and not seeing your friends, and make it safe for them to talk. And you can't fix it for them, but just validate what they're thinking and feeling, you know. So that's pretty much what I would say. Talk about it, be there for each other. If faith is important to you, I know that churches are closed, but there's a lot of them that have it on video. So for the
Mhm.
Assyrians that traditionally go to Assyrian church, and maybe if I'm not sure if we have it on video or not because I go to American churches, but for sure the
Mhm.
American churches have them. So you can look up the Catholic, the non-denominational, whatever it is that you practice, and find that for yourself. And they have youth too as well. Netflix, they have it too for the family to watch. For you to let your youth know about it too, they can do it with their friends actually. So finding out what the apps are for the youth to engage their friends is very important. Do daily chickens, go for walks. Exercise is so important. So it doesn't cost anything to go for a family walk. And of course, practice social distancing and be safe. But I go for walks now every day thanks to the virus. I'm just not thanks, but because of the virus, I'm going daily now. Something that I wouldn't do before. Now I'm like, oh, I'm going to keep this up because it's such a stress reliever. You get outside, you see the flowers and the trees, and the weather's beautiful right now. Just unplug for a little while. Don't live in it because it's going to get better. This too shall pass.
Absolutely. And this too shall pass. I really like what you said, Dina, about when someone talks to you and you sense that they are stressed, if you sense that they are more anxious or
Mm-hmm.
show symptoms of depression, you said validate how they're feeling. A
Yeah.
lot of times, you know, I see it within our culture. When someone is down, we tell them to snap out of it. When
Yeah.
someone is feeling a certain way, instead of letting them be validated and letting them
Mm.
be heard, and then
Yeah.
take the ideas and suggestions that you said about,
Mm-hmm.
finding our comfortable space and place rather than add more stress to it or self
Mm-hmm.
medicate, like you said. A lot of people try to hide the symptoms by it's substance abuse or alcohol. that it enrages them more, it's really not helping. It actually makes it worse. So thank you for bringing those points up. I think it's really important
Mhm.
for our culture and our community to have these conversations and to really make aware the normalization of this
Mhm.
conversation, that we can get together, we can have conversations, and we can seek
Mhm.
out individuals like yourself that, as a professional who are familiar with the way our culture does things, to say that this too
Mhm.
shall pass, but there are things that we can do. Maybe we can do some yoga, maybe we can go for
Yeah.
walks. How do we de-escalate the situation that we find ourselves in? And then there are other professionals in this field that are familiar with the way that we Assyrians do these things,
Mhm.
and perhaps we can learn more. Perhaps we can add to what we already know and really break that glass of shame and stigma. This is something that
Absolutely.
the Assyrian Wellness Collaborative has really worked on, and they continue to do that. We have a new chair and we have new committee
Mhm.
members, and we actually look at other cultures and how they have struggled with their PTSDs and how they
Mhm.
handle culturally appropriate and sensitive ways for best practices. So, thank you for bringing all of that up, and thank you for all the
Mhm.
work that you did as an advisor so that our culture is more aware and more informed on how we can improve our own well being, our own mental
Mhm.
health, and how we can help those that we care about in help as well.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure. And I think I want everybody to know too that 1 in 5 adults in the United States has a mental illness. So 1 in 25 has a severe mental illness. So it's very common. It's very prevalent. So children ages, 6 to 17, 1 in 6. By the time 50% of adults will have some kind of a mental illness, they'll experience it between the ages of 14 is when it shows up. So this is very common. So a lot of times when kids are isolating or withdrawing, or when kids are depressed, they have a lot of anger. So anger is a normal emotion, but you don't live in it 24/7. And so the grades are starting to drop, their moods are changing. We need to start to look at all these things and not just say, they're tembel, they're lazy, hamasha khishana. These are the things that we say, they're always worried, they're always sad. No, that's an illness. We have moments where we're sad, we have moments where we're nervous or angry, but we don't stay in that state. And that's what I want the audience to know, that it's super common. Your brain is an organ too. And your brain is where you think, you feel, you have your senses, your reasoning, your decision making, your impulse control. It's nowhere else in your body but your brain. So if your brain is diseased, it's not going to work properly. And how does it show? In the mood disorders, the depressions, the anxiety, the more severe ones, which is the schizophrenia with the psychosis when you hallucinate. So our brain is an organ that needs to be taken care of just like every other part of your body. And we have insurance too. Everybody in the United States pretty much has insurance. And if not, there's clinics that take the uninsured. And we have county mental health. So Medi-Cal has insurance. People think just because they have Medi-Cal or Medicare. No, they're absolutely insured and they have great coverage. And they have interpreters, they have transportation. So all these insurance companies have all these services that people are not aware of that are free. You just have to pick
Mhm.
up the phone and
You
make
know,
the appointment.
absolutely. And we would like to share your number with your practice in Turlock. And I
Mm-hmm.
do remember when we were discussing with Behavioral Health Recovery Services how much they pay attention to the Assyrian community, Dina, how
Mm-hmm.
they really want people who are in need to reach out, to be able to, that's what the collaborative was all about, to provide those phone
Mm-hmm.
numbers, to have, and we did receive a lot of confidential phone calls, and we were able to really navigate through the system to help them, to connect them in a timely manner. Of course, they have to contact first,
Mm-hmm.
they have to make that initial contact. But in closing, Dina, we always paid attention to our elderly senior
Mm-hmm.
citizens in communities that come from other countries as older adults find
Mm-hmm.
themselves in less of an acculturation situation where they don't
Mm-hmm.
speak the language, there are barriers. That alone in itself creates some adversity. It creates
Mm-hmm.
less socialization, especially when their adult children are working all day. They're home. They're not quite in
Mm-hmm.
a situation to be in a facility or a home. Tell us, what seniors or our elderly watching this program, how do we pay more closer attention to our grandmas, grandparents, aunts, and uncles, or a neighbor that we care about that is experiencing depression, that are experiencing less socialization, and we see that decline in our seniors in our culture?
I would say first and foremost, know the signs so that you can look for them. So if somebody is depressed, they're going to want to, you're going to see the change in mood. It's going to be the sadness. They want to isolate, withdraw. They'll be irritable. They have concentration issues as well, increased or decreased sleep and appetite, loss of interest, crying spells. When it gets really bad, it will be suicidal. You'll start to smell things that other people don't smell or feel things crawling on you. A lot of people actually have the tactile hallucination and they don't realize. They just think like, oh, I think it's something's on me and it's itching, and they're always itching, itching, itching. But that's actually hallucination. So I think is know the signs so that when you see them, you immediately get them the help that they need because help is there for them. And I think be sensitive to the fact that when the seniors come here, they're used to family and extended family and always being together and not having to schedule an appointment to see you. And we're in a country where we're like fast, 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 go, go, go paced, and they're used to the family, the extended family being there and always being accessible. So I would say for the ones that are blessed enough to have grandparents around, make time to have coffee once a week with them or Sunday breakfast. It doesn't take much to show them you care and you love them. And I think for the seniors, I would say, a lot of them go to church. Why don't they formulate some senior groups for themselves at the church just to hang out and socialize? Same thing for the women. There's a lot of women too that are actually widowed and they're very lonely and they miss having that companionship. So there's a lot of women that we have within our community that have been widowed. And I know if they would just get together, they could lean on each other and support each other. So I think it's using what we already have and build on that. So we have our community centers, we have our churches, but we need to talk about these things. And I'd be willing to go to any church and talk, and see what the need is, and the youth groups. We have all these youth groups. I challenge you to do like these little mini surveys. You do homework in schools and just ask some basic questions. What would you like to have in terms of a little mini group at the church or if it has the basement? So, right, community capacity building. We learned that through the Assyrian Wellness
Right.
Collaborative with Behavioral Health
Mhm.
and Recovery Services. Educate them about the resources in their community so they can have access to it.
Yes.
So I think we have a lot of work to do with our seniors. Give them lots of
Yes,
love.
absolutely. Lots of love, and appreciating all that
Mm-hmm.
they have done to raise their
For
families, their
sure.
grandchildren. And yes, everyone has their own life. They're busy, and in
Mhm,
this country it is different than
mhm,
our countries that we come from, where it's more family oriented. But that's what
mhm,
advancement is, because we
mhm,
want our kids to be active, involved, get an education, work. Obviously that leaves less time for family time, but it's important to re-emphasize the fact that how important it is for a family member. We know each other. We know, each other's moods, especially now that a lot more people are sheltering in place. A lot more people are spending time together. What an opportunity to actually be closer and really let
mhm.
one another know how much we appreciate them. And if someone doesn't have grandparents, perhaps they can adopt some grandparents and some
Absolutely.
elderly
Mhm.
neighbors, or someone else's aunt or uncle or grandparents, and you will really feel more empowered by doing that, and just let them know that how much they're appreciated.
And I think you're teaching our younger generation to respect the elderly. Give grandma a call, give grandpa a call, just say hi. We have video chat now, so it doesn't take 5 minutes. There's 1,444 minutes in a day. Give 10 minutes of it to a grandparent on a phone call or a grandma or somebody that like you said, adopted grandparent that, they don't have somebody their own, maybe their own bio kids calling them, if it's a niece or a nephew, why not? Extended family. But I love the idea of adopting a grandparent.
I think that's a wonderful idea for those who are fortunate enough to have grandparents around. But for those who don't, perhaps they can seek out
Mm-hmm.
those. It will really bring a lot of warmth to their own, psyche, their own well being. There has
Mm-hmm.
to be some silver lining from sheltering in place, from spending more time with
Yes.
family members. We can't always just keep talking about the negative, the bad.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we have to know enough to protect ourselves. From
Mm-hmm.
COVID-19, we have to make the best out of, the employment, economic situation. But it also is
Yes.
an opportunity to spend more time together, to really validate one another's feeling, emotions. And this
Mm-hmm.
May being Mental Health Awareness Month, thank you to Dina for really bringing out some very important highlights in our conversations. And in closing, Dina, what is it that you would like our viewers to know about mental health, about well-being, and about taking
Mm-hmm.
care of oneself so we can take care of our loved ones?
I think it's, to just normalize your mental health. Your brain is your control tower, and it's very important to take care of it. So mental health is about well-being, it's about the quality of your life, it's about the decisions that you make, it's about how you feel and how you see this world, how you view it, and it's important to take care of it and to be selfish in a very healthy way. So if people are mindful about their mental health, they're going to make such better decisions with regards to who am I allowing myself to hang out with, who am I allowing myself to go out with, why am I making this decision, is it what's best for me? Because if you're mindful about your mental health and well being, that means you're really thoughtful about the decisions you're making every day. Am I eating this? Is this good for me? Is this person good for me? Oh, I've noticed a change in me. What's going on? You're going to be very self aware. That's that self awareness and self care we talked about as well. So, mental health is key to your physical health. Don't forget that, everybody. And it's lots of resources out there for you to take care of yourself. And it doesn't just have to be a therapist or psychiatrist form. It's your decision making. It's who you surround yourself by. If it's your faith, that's a great resource, as well. So that's what I like to tell everybody. It's, don't give it a scarlet letter because it doesn't deserve one.
Thank you, Dina, so much. You have the last word on this, and we will share the name of your practice and your phone number for
Hmm.
those who feel they can reach out to you and just have a conversation with you about how they can improve their own well being. Thank you so much, Dina, for joining us. This concludes my conversation with Dina Malik, licensed clinical social worker. This is Carmen Morad on the Modern Assyrian.